Hey, thank you. Good to see everybody, though I got to see everybody for 2 minutes, a minute ago. Uh, those who were here a few weeks ago when I spoke know that this is part 2. But since I figured not everybody would have been there, I'm going to do a quick recap first. We're looking. Oh, okay. Yeah, you can start when you're set. So I've titled this The Weight of Glory because it's modeled after a sermon that C.S. Lewis preached in, I think it was 1942, so long before I was around. Anyways, where we're at, I'm going to recap a little here. Part 1, we covered understanding what our desires are about and some of the things that appertain, if you will, to those desires, like the fitting rewards that go with them, and a number of the problems that we have when our desires get distracted for any of several reasons. Part 2 today is much more about the journey that we take, partly based on our desires, because we pick which way we're going, and a bit about our fellow travelers. Look to your left or right, or forward or back. Okay, so this came, as I said, from a sermon. Yes, it was 1942. C.S. Lewis, pictured, I hope, yes, thank you. He was a longtime atheist, converted at age 32, so I guess a 32-year atheist. Anyways, around 1930, he was a professor of literature at Oxford, an expert on Middle English and old mythology and such, wrote a ton of fiction and nonfiction. I'll give you a few references on the very last slide in case you want to follow up and read any other of his stuff. So in part 1, we talked about how desire, even though we kind of think of desire as a little distasteful, we associate it with lust or things like that today. Desire in itself is a good thing. It's a motivator. It needs to aim at a fitting reward. I gave the example last time of, say, a person who falls in love. Well, if they're seeking the reward, say marriage, because they've fallen in love, that's a fitting reward. It's the love itself in consummation or completed. If they're seeking marriage because the woman in question is rich and they want to get their hands on her money, that is not a fitting reward. It's not the consummation of love, the end that you're aiming at. So desire in itself is fine, but there's a lot of things around it that can turn it negative. Often, though, we just set our sights and our desires too low. We aim at something that's not worth aiming at. One reason is that we don't get the goal. We don't understand what it's about. And this illustration here is one I used last time. You see a presumably poor kid living in what looks like some kind of slum or something. And he's happily making mud pies. Somebody comes up and offers him a holiday at the beach. He's never seen a beach. He has no clue what this would be. He's likely to respond, no, I'm good here. I'm very happy with my mud pies and things. He just doesn't grasp what is out there to be had. And the application to us in relation to heaven is, I think, pretty obvious. We just probably can't get it yet. Likewise, we may have to grow into it. That same kid, as he gets a little older, even if he never gets to a beach, he'll eventually know what that is, and that desire will make more sense to him. That's true of lots of things in our lives. We have to grow into it before the desire and the longing for it makes any sense. Some things, though, are just plain beyond us. I used another example of arts and music. I know a little bit about both of those things, not very much, and I can appreciate a certain amount. If I make a drawing for myself, well, I'm bad enough at it, I probably wouldn't even get a little appreciation out of my drawing. But if I started on it, I would enjoy the process, I would learn things, that's all good. But someone, and there are several in the room, who really knows how to do art or music can appreciate so much more. And will have much more sophisticated and sensible desires about it, too. So there's a feedback loop if you will, going through all of this. Sometimes, though, we see something off in the distance. We see a sunset. We hear an inspiring piece of music. We go to the museum and see this amazing painting. We get some kind of a sense. Last time I called it numinous, which is kind of an unusual word, but we get some sort of a spiritual sense, some sort of an emotional sense. Something grabs us about it and whispers to us that there's something out there. But those things are pointing somewhere else. It's not the painting itself, it's not the music itself. They're pointing us somewhere. Now, when we see those sorts of things and start thinking about those distant, greater rewards, the world makes us a bunch of offers in exchange. First off, perfect. It tells us that what we can touch is all there is. Okay, that the world is just a bunch of matter and energy, which are the same thing anyway, and that's the end of it. Or, this one's really common in the news and media, the world promises to make the world great. Okay? The next time political system X is tried, well, we won't make those mistakes, and it'll work, and we'll all live in utopia. Well, we've been trying that for a few centuries now, a few millennia. Third, though, it tries to distract us from noticing that all this stuff it's promising is going to end, including us. Okay, let's say we achieve the next attempt at capitalism, communism, socialism, whatever ism you want to try, works. We got it right this time. I'm skeptical, but let's say that happened. It's still going to end. You know, the asteroid or whatever, for each of us, it's going to end individually, and it's going to end for the last generation of all, whenever that is. We can't stop the heat death of the universe or the laws of thermodynamics. You know, it's all going to end because it's all finite. If you push back on these first few claims, then what the world will tell you is, well, you don't want to have eternity anyway because it'd be boring, and then what are you going to do? I use the example of a show called The Good Place that a few of you may have watched. All of these things are setting our sights way too low. There's something behind all that stuff that we're really aiming for. Desire transforms into longing. And here's what C.S. Lewis actually said in the original sermon about at this point. But all these promises we were just talking about, all this is a cheat. The books or the music will betray us if we trust to them. What came through them was longing. They're great images, good images. But if they're mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into idols. And each of us, I'm sure, has seen that in our own lives one way or another at some point. These things are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. Our education, in large part, is aimed to silence this shy, persistent inner voice and to convince us that the good of man and woman is to be found on this earth. Again, we're setting our sights too low. So what does all this stuff point to? Well, clearly, since this is the topic of the sermon this morning, it's pointing to heaven as our greatest desire. We can't fully understand it yet. It's infinite. We're not yet. Well, in a sense we are, but we're not in that state of experiencing the reality. What on earth could show us anything about heaven? Everything here is subject to that decay, that falling apart, the aging, which I feel more every year, as does everybody else, I'm sure, except Drew, maybe. Give her a few years. Everything here tops out. Everything out here hits some finite limit, and then it dies. Everything here is pointing. what it tells us that's meaningful is a pointer to something beyond itself. That's even true of you and your neighbor. All right, well, our limitation to finite experience right now makes it really hard to understand that heaven just won't be the same. We sort of know that. Remember, though, that we won't be the same either. It's not just taking us as we are, plopping us in a new infinite place, and that fixes everything. We change too. Lewis goes on to enumerate 5 main things as the top-level points of what the Bible tells us about heaven. You could break it down different ways, but these 5 are how Lewis broke it down. First is that we will be with Christ. And there's a passage, how am I doing on time? Oh, we're good. There's a passage in John where Jesus says that where I am, they may be also. It's in his high priestly prayer, as it's sometimes called. There's plenty of other verses too. I just picked a few here to illustrate. Second, we're going to be like Christ, not just with him, but like him. As 1 John says here, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. We'll come back to that. Third, and this is usually couched in a variety of symbolic ways, we will have glory. 2 Corinthians 4 has one of the examples of this. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Again, there's this sense of pointing from where we are now to this future thing. Fourth, we're going to be feasted, fed. There's all the stuff about the wedding supper of the Lamb, having a kingdom conferred on us, as it says here in Luke, eating and drinking at Christ's table in his kingdom. That's cool. There's not a lot said about it. Sounds fun. Fifth, some position or responsibility that we'll have. We're not just going to be sitting around strumming harps all day. I guess for my sister that would work. She's a professional guitarist, so she might find that as good responsibility. I would just create a large area around myself where people were avoiding. Anyways, we'll have some kind of position or responsibility where it talks about sitting on thrones, judging one or the other, the 12 tribes of Israel, it says in one place, being pillars in the house of God. So there's a lot of stuff in there. Well, let's go through these in a little bit more detail. First, being with Christ. Lewis points out, I think rightly, that if we have that one, we don't really need any of the others. That kind of sums it all up. If you have God plus everything, you don't have any more than you had if you just had God. Okay. So, okay, this is pretty cool, and we could just stop here. But it's a little harder to see all the other things, so let's go into them. Okay, think for a moment though. Is that going to get boring? Remember that last point that the world makes to us that, oh, you don't want infinity, it's just going to get boring. I don't think being with Christ is going to get boring. First off, he'll know right off if we're getting bored. In fact, he knows now exactly the moment at which we would get bored then, and he can do something about it. Okay? I have pretty good confidence that that's within God's capabilities. Let's take a look at Malachi 3. Is this readable back? I pumped the font up as much as I could to get the whole passage in, but it's probably going to be a little marginal. So let me just read it out here. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap. Then the Lord will have men who will bring offerings in righteousness, and the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be acceptable to the Lord, as in days gone by, as in former years. Then those who feared the Lord, I should mention that that's a long ... there. We've just jumped from verse 4 to 16. So if you want to check it out later, there's more stuff in here. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. On the day when I act, says the Lord Almighty, they will be my treasured possession. I will spare them just as a father has compassion and spares his son who serves him. And you will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. This is one of the longer descriptions of what's coming. It's far from the only one in the Bible, but I think this one's worth looking at. All right, so there's a lot of change talked about in there. Things will be different then. To be in heaven at all, we also have to be different. We couldn't survive there the way we are now. We couldn't fit there the way we are now. As it says in 1 Corinthians 15, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. For that same simple reason, right? Flesh and blood ends. It's finite. We get sick. We die. We go off on weird emotional tangents. We do all sorts of stuff. 2 Peter 1:4, we will be partakers of the divine nature. Something about God will become true of us too. Try to imagine for a moment a few things. How would your life feel different from now when your desires are just always godly? When communication with your spouse or your friend or whoever never misses. You don't have to go and patch up. No, that's not what I meant. That came out wrong. I can tell this has happened to people besides me. When travel takes no time. I'm not sure that's true in heaven, but maybe. But imagine how different your life would be. Hey, Ruth, can I come over for dinner? Oh, here I am. That'd be kind of handy. When you don't have to prioritize or hurry. There's enough time. There's something, I hadn't planned on mentioning this, but it came to mind, so let me throw it in. You've probably heard people say, oh, I really don't pray. God's too busy to have time for me, or I'm not worth his time. You know what? God has a lot more spare time than you do. He's got all the time he needs. So that just doesn't hold. And that penetrated my head a long time ago. And it doesn't change a whole lot in your life, but it changed it a little bit for me. That it's like, no, I'm not wasting God's time. He can afford it. He can afford it. He can afford to attend to and to love you. And it doesn't take away from him loving me or the next person over. That is worth contemplating for a while. Just as simple and dumb as that may sound, it's true and it makes a difference. Okay, right now, we are not up to that stuff at all. Lewis gave us an illustration of this. He wrote a little book called The Great Divorce. And it's not about divorce, it's about heaven and hell and that great divorce with a chasm in between. And this one is really worth reading. It's the story of a bunch of residents of hell that hop on a tour bus and come up to heaven for a tour. It's actually been set as a stage play, which I saw, I forget, Kennedy Center or someplace like that. Really well done. Anyways, here's a passage from that. The men and women, there were both, were as they always had been. It was the light, the grass, the trees that were different, made of some different substance, so much solider than things in our country that men were ghosts by comparison. I bent down and tried to pluck a daisy. The stalk wouldn't break. I tugged till the sweat stood out on my forehead and I'd lost most of the skin off my hands. The little flower was hard, not like wood or even iron, but like diamond. I tried to pick a leaf up. My heart almost cracked with the effort, and I believe I did just raise it. But I had to let it go at once. It was heavier than a sack of coal. As I stood, recovering my breath with great gasps and looking down at the daisy, I noticed that I could see the grass, not only between my feet, but through them. I also was a phantom. And remember, this is one of the folks off the tour bus from hell who's visiting heaven. In that passage, we talked about seeing God and how we really can't see him as we are now. Let me just skip through. I'm running a little bit short on time, so I'm not going to read all of these. I'll just read the first or something. Exodus 33 says, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." That doesn't go into any detail, but it's pretty telling. Next slide, Brian. Seeing God as we shall be after we've undergone this transformation. Matthew 5, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And then skipping to the 2 Corinthians passage, "We all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory." There's that glory that Lewis made point number 3, "which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit." So there's trying to see God as we are now, trying to see God once we've been transformed, which are quite different things, but there's also being seen by God, which we don't tend to focus on so much. "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." And Hagar in Genesis 16 says, "You are the God who sees me." We'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but let's skip to point number 2, the being like Christ part, not just the being with Christ part. "Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." That in itself is going to take that transformation. We're going to be different beings. We're going to be much cooler than we are now. We won't be short on time. Our friends and ourselves won't be tempted to sin. We'll be surrounded by those real things. We won't be able to see the grass through our feet because we'll be real like the heavenly grass is real instead of just visiting. There'll be no need for longing for stuff beyond reach. No fear of the other shoe dropping. At the same time, remember, we're not going to be Christ. Okay? We're not going to be omniscient. We can still learn. I think that's going to be an important part of not being bored, but your mileage may vary. We won't be omnipresent. We'll still have to relate to other people. And we won't be omnipotent. I don't think power is going to matter much to us, but we're not going to be omnipotent. Lewis's 4th and 5th points about being feasted and fed and having some position, he barely touches on them in this sermon. I looked into it a little bit. Paul barely touches on them either. There's a little bit in Revelations and some of the Gospels about it. I'm just going to skip those two. Homework if you are so interested. That leaves us with point number 3, the one Lewis spends most of his time on, which is that glory thing. Glory involves how others see us. There's that famous verse, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." I'm sure we've all imagined and hoped for the moment when Jesus says that to us, and hoped that we'll do well enough in whatever sense that he will say that. But imagine that first moment when you hear that from another human being. You've just finished this big project, turned it in at work or at school, wherever, and whoever's in authority looks over it and says something like, "Well done, good job." Now that quickly descends for us into pride. It's like we go off and tell all our friends how great we did. But think of just that first short moment when it's just pure joy at having done what you were meant to do, and where the one who has the right to judge it approves what you did. Try and hang on to that little moment. I think that's what heaven is going to be like a lot of the time. Can we focus on that for others too? That's harder. I mean, we've all experienced, I hope, that moment I was just describing, We can't experience it for each other. We can help each other to have it from time to time. I'll come back to that. But in the meantime, there's the other side. There are those folks that we're visiting on the bus. What is going on there? Athanasius, who was 4th century, maybe 3rd, I forget, said that evil is the absence of good, not the other way around. Evil, therefore, naturally fades away. Non-existence is associated with evil, not with good. Lewis has the same theme in The Great Divorce, and actually this appears in several of his works. The residents of hell slowly drift further and further apart and slowly become less and less substantial. They already started out being able to see through their feet to the grass. And Lewis pictures this as just happening over millennia until people fade into who knows what. In The Lord of the Rings, we see the same thing. Lewis and Tolkien were great friends. In fact, Tolkien was largely responsible for Lewis's conversion, apart from, obviously, the Holy Spirit. But in The Lord of the Rings, the Nazgul, the big black riders, also fade because of the influence of the ring. When, I think it's at Rivendell, they get thrown into the river and they lose their cloaks and their horses. You can't see them anymore. There's nothing there to see. And there's several other cases, too. What about all of us? Let's think about the progress going from here to there. Remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. Or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. That's what we're building ourselves into, one or the other of those things in everything we do. All day long, we are, in some degree, helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. I'm kind of alternating between Lewis's fiction and nonfiction here because they're so tightly integrated. That's one of the things I love about him, is he can write fiction that tells you the truth. Aslan's Country, how many people have read any of Narnia? About half? Well, this is from the very last book. It's appropriately titled The Last Battle. And it's right near the end, where they've made it in. People they're arriving at the threshold of, in effect, heaven. All their life in this world and all their adventures had only been the cover and the title page. Now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. That's a picture worth hanging on to, I think. But jumping back to here and to the nonfiction of Lewis, he mentions that it is in light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. That one's hard. There are no ordinary people. Look around you. These are not ordinary people. These are not mortals around you. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nature itself is going to end, and we aren't. That should make us very serious about how we treat each other, how we treat the inner life of our mind, building ourselves into that creature of glory, not that creature of horror that Lewis is talking about. Thanks.